Hello and welcome to the Planning and Development Council meeting for the town of Oakville. It's November 13th at 6:30 p.m. And Madam Clerk, do we have any regrets from councilors?
Counselor Shi is not yet in attendance, but we don't, oh, sorry, yes, he just joined. We're all good.
He made it. All right. Council, do you have any declarations of pecuniary interest? Madam Clerk, none were presented. Council, could two of us move and second resolving into committee of the whole? Councillor Chisholm and Councillor Giddings, thank you very much. Any objection? There being none, that motion carries, and we're resolved into committee of the whole, which is a bit of a relaxed rule environment that we like to use for planning matters especially. We are reordering the agenda to deal with a last minute item that we need to take care of tonight. And under section 2, sub 8 of the procedural bylaw, the chair has the authority to change the order of things. And item 8.1 was added to the agenda today, and it's a confidential labor relations report update, which was distributed under separate cover to the members of council. And council, there's a fork in the road here. Would you like to give me a motion that council ratify the memorandum of agreement with QP Local 136 dated November 10th, 2023, and that the agreement be executed in accordance with bylaw 2013-057? Or would you like to go into camera? Councillor Knoll, you're moving the first, the former. All right. And,
yes, I will move it, yes.
Thank you. And there's one more little item that we need, and that is perhaps you, Councillor Haslett-Thiel. I'm sure you're saying something important, but I can't hear you.
Your worship, she's had problems with her volume before. I think she may need to try to go to the phone.
All right. So before I can accept Councillor Knoll's motion, I need a motion to waive the notice procedure, the notice provision in the procedural bylaw. And for that, we need 2/3 of council. Councillor Grant, thank you for that. Councillor Haslett-Thiel, do you object to any of what we're doing here? Use a head shake. All right. In that case, Councillor Grant, your motion to waive is in order, and I'll call the vote. And Councillor Haslett-Thiel, if you take your hand down for momentarily, I won't interpret it as a negative vote. So is there any objection to Councillor Grant's motion to waive the notice period? Madam Clerk, there is none, and so that carries. And Councillor Knoll's motion to ratify the memorandum of agreement with QP 136 is now on the floor. And I'll ask if there's any objection to that. And Madam Clerk, there being none shown, I declare that carried as well. Thank you, everybody. Now, Councillor Haslett-Thiel, do you need a minute to get your audio equipment working or anything like that? Yes, I guess you do. Well, you know, the old solution for all problems with computers was to reboot. We'll leave you to wrestle with that problem. So now, Council, we have consent items, and Councillor Elgar, the parks item is a discussion item, not a consent item. Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Can I separate out number 4.6?
Yes, you can.
And if there's no other separations, I'd be happy to move the rest.
All right. Is there any objection to the rest? There being none, the rest are...
Do you have a registered delegate for 4.7?
Oh, sorry. All right. We have Councillor O'Meara, let's delete 4.7 because we have a registered delegation who I believe is speaking for the applicant, so I'm not sure if that applicant really wants to hear. Councillor Haslett-Thiel.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay, let's hope it holds on. I wanted to separate out 4.6 as well.
4.6 is now doubly separated.
Couldn't hear it.
By the way, what we hear from you here is not the clearest, but we do hear you. All right, so Councillor O'Meara has kindly moved all of them but 4.6 and 4.7. Is there any objection to the balance? And there being none, those are adopted. And that brings us to 4.6, Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I just had a question to staff. In that, from what I'm understanding, the changes they're bringing forward means that only this revenue goes towards new GO Transit stations that they're asking us to collect for them. So I'm just wondering if they can clarify that doesn't include expansion, changes, additions, anything that they make us do. I know in the Bronte GO station, they're going to require us to move the main entrance to the south side of Spears Road. I'm also aware of the pressures in Midtown to expand the platform, these sorts of things. So I'm just wondering if staff can clarify that and whether we're going to make sure that we get administrative time and everything that we're advocating for that we need in order to grow and to do what the province is mandating us to do.
Thank you, Councillor O'Meara, for your question. Is Matt Day ready to answer? I see him standing ready, but he's on mute. Mr. Day.
Thanks, Mayor Burton. And through you, Mayor Burton, I'm going to turn that over to Sarah Burra, who will probably be able to answer that better than I can.
All right.
Thank you,
Sarah.
Councillor. Thank you, Your Worship. So just to clarify, the proposed bill as it stands is for new GO Transit station GO Transit stations, so not expansions as it's currently written.
So would that be something that we're going to include in our advocacy place to change that or to add those to the regs, or how are we managing that in terms of what they're doing and what we probably want?
I can answer that
Thank you.
one. Councillor O'Meara, that's up to us. That's what council's for, is to decide what our advocacy will be.
So I was slow playing that one, Your Worship. If we can see that staff find their way to add those as advocacy pieces to the letter we're sending in here, I think it's vitally important that the implications of growth along that line and much needed. We can't grow unless we get those extensions and additions to the GO train stations unless we have those. So I would hope that my council colleagues would see through to support that in our advocacy piece as well.
I dare say we're all unanimous in this. All right, Councillor Haslett-Thiel.
Thank you, Mayor Burton, and thank you, Councillor O'Meara, because I wanted to make sure we were going to advocate for a station contribution for platform extensions, which would really help with the housing and the congestion. My other question is, a reference in the staff report that should proposed changes go through, that the exemptions only be for affordable rental. So I'm not seeing. First. That better?
Councillor, let me suggest that you forward your suggestion to me by email, and before the letter goes out, we'll see what we can do to incorporate your concern. Will that? Okay, there we go. So now I need a mover for 4.6 and 4.7. Councillor O'Meara, thank you. Any objection? Madam Clerk would be.
Sorry, I think that was just for 4.6.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I'll get there. So I'm going to take 4.6, call it carried. And on 4.7, we're now going to call our registered delegation, Nick DeCastri from Podium.
Thank you, Your Worship. We, I believe, are registered just as a precaution in case there are any questions. We have nothing to add and are delighted or happy for this matter to proceed as a consent matter.
All right, so at this point, I will accept Councillor O'Meara's motion for your item as well, and I'll look to council for any objection, and there being none, you're carried too. Thanks, everybody. Now, we come to tonight's public hearing item, which has created some public interest. And people who are watching the meeting live stream on oakville.ca who'd like to add their voice to this particular item can do so by calling 905-815-6095, and we'll connect you to the meeting and slot you in to take a turn. And for everybody who's interested in this, please let me explain that this is not a decision meeting. This is a collect the issues to evaluate the application on meeting. So this isn't really the time when you argue against it. This is when you name the issue that you think the staff will examine and perhaps come up with will help staff come to a, if you're against it, a decision against it. And if you're for it, that you think will help staff come up with a decision in favor of it. So we'll entertain anything you have to say, but your most efficient and most effective thing to say is, what is the issue that you believe the application either is a shining example of and therefore you support it, or is somehow or other the application falls short on the issue and ought not to proceed, or it needs adjustment to proceed. So with that, we have a, let me see here how we're going to do this. Okay, because of changes the province has implemented to this process, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to hear from the applicant. In this case, it's the agent for the applicant, Paul Demchak from Battery Planning and Management Team. And there are other experts with Mr. Demchak. And after that, we will proceed to questions by counsel of that applicant. And then we will hear from the rest of the delegations, and we'll poll the audience for any further delegations. So I hope that that's got everybody assured and ready to be patient, and fasten your seatbelt and settle in. Thank you very much. So is Mr. Demchak ready with his presentation? If so, let's see. I guess it's up to you, Paul, to light your video, and there you go. And I think we're going to be able to hear you, although I haven't heard you yet.
Sorry, Mayor and Council, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. And you're on the loudspeaker, so everybody can hear you. Please proceed.
Okay, great. I'm not sure if my camera's on.
Well,
my apologies. I'm not sure if I have to. I believe it's been turned on my end. I'm not sure if there's anything clerks can do, but in any event, I'm happy to proceed with presenting. So thank you. My name is Paul Demchak with Battery Planning and Management. I am the planning consultant on behalf of the applicant for this evening's meeting. The owner of the property is Format Group, and Icon Architecture, the principal architects in the project. We are also joined this evening by our traffic consultant, Lee Consulting, and ERA Architects is the heritage architect for the development. Just in terms of housekeeping on this first slide, you can see that for anyone who wishes to call in and speak to this application, there's a number provided on the screen. And the purpose of this public meeting is to introduce the application to Oakville Council and the public for the proposed 10-story building on the subject property. And a rendering of the building is shown on this particular slide. The proposed development is a mixed-use building with ground floor commercial uses and above-grade residential uses. And the development locates the majority of the building's mass towards the northeast corner of the site, adjacent to the intersection of Lakeshore Road and Chisholm Street. The northern portion of the site includes ground floor commercial space and a courtyard with a commemorative heritage structure and interpretive landscape space. And vehicular access is located on the east side of the site from Chisholm Street. The ground floor of commercial space is situated at sidewalk level along Lakeshore Road, while the residential main entrance and amenity space is accessed from Chisholm Street and located at the rear of the site. The building includes glazing at the ground floor retail spaces along Lakeshore Road, and multiple entry points and access paths are created along both streets, with sidewalk extensions incorporated to connect the retail spaces, the heritage space, the residential amenity areas, and the main residential entrance. The building, as you can just see from this rendering, is intended to be clad in stone and brick panels with punch windows and both inset as well as some projecting balconies. And the 9th and 10th floors are clad in glass, which also includes a mechanical penthouse on the rooftop. Next slide, please. So the property is municipally known as 42 Lakeshore Road West. And again, it's on the southwest corner of Lakeshore Road and Chisholm Street, approximately 200 meters from 16 Mile Creek, as shown on this slide. It's a rectangular lot, and the site is mostly vacant, with an existing heritage building that's located on the northwest corner of the site, known as the McCraney Robertson House, which I will speak to further in a moment. Vehicle access is provided via Chisholm Street, and the site is also within 170 meters of the nearest bus station, located at Chisholm Street and Rebecca Street to the north of the site, which connects to both downtown Oakville as well as the Oakville GO station. Next slide, please. So as council is, and the public is likely very aware, the site has a pretty storied history. In 2009, the subject site was approved at the time for a 5-story mixed-use building. And the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment applications at the time were approved with a number of site-specific provisions and conditions. And the subject site has subsequently had a number of different landowners since 2009 who proposed various design adjustments to the approved building form. However, none of those applications proceeded to a building permit on the site to date. One specific thing I would like to note, and I'll probably mention it again later, you can see from the image on the left in the previous plan, the original development was approved at a 5-story height with a 0-meter rear yard setback condition, which abuts the residential townhomes to the south. What is intended in this new design is essentially providing a greater setback and separation distance from that rear yard, which ranges from 6 meters at its lowest up to 10 meters as the building cascades up in height. And what we're looking at doing, among other things, is taking away a lot of that massing that was originally intended on that south end of the site, and increasing the height of the development accordingly to move some of that massing away from the south. Next slide, please. So just in terms of some of the planning context, so the site is within a central business district in the Kerr Village growth area. Specifically is designated as Main Street 1 within the Kerr Village land use plan. The Main Street 1 designation is intended to permit apartments and mixed-use buildings, and also requires commercial or community spaces at grade, which is intended to maintain and enhance a pedestrian-oriented Main Street function. 4 stories in height is the typical permitted height within the Main Street 1 land use designation. However, as mentioned in 2009, there was the existing exception policy, which allowed for a height of 5 stories, conditional upon the owner entering into a Section 37 agreement of the Planning Act at that time. Next slide, please. The Town of Oakville zoning bylaw 2014-014, which applies to the site, sets out the standards for how land is to be used and developed. And in this instance, the subject site is designated as Central Business District, Special Provision 17. And that special provision, again, allowed for a 5-story height under the existing zoning from 2009, and further had some specific provisions, including conditions of the Section 37 agreement, as well as some other built form standards for the proposed development at that time. Next slide, please. So there's obviously some rationale, not only from a land use planning framework context. Obviously, there's been a number of changes at the provincial policy level, but also at the regional level in terms of ROPA 48 and most recently 49 for how we deal with strategic growth areas. In addition, what we've looked at as part of considering this application is some of the immediate context along specifically Lakeshore Road West, which includes a range of apartment buildings with heights and densities of various forms. So this site is located in close proximity to several buildings with either comparable or in some instances greater heights than that is proposed. So you can see from this image, there's a series of taller buildings, including a 17-story building at 6 John Street, a 12-story building at 111 Forsyth, as well as a 13-story building at 125 Forsyth that's located within the immediate context of the proposed development. In many cases, the taller buildings in the immediate context abut low-rise residential areas similar to the proposed development. Next slide, please. So this is an image on the right-hand side of the screen of the existing condition of the designated heritage building that exists on the property. It was built in 1880, and there's some details here on the slide. It was the residence of William McCraney, who became the mayor of Oakville. And in 2016, I would note that there was a previous magnolia tree in the property that was part of the original approval in terms of the heritage attributes of the property. And at the time, it was unfortunately removed by a previous landowner of the property. The existing building is in poor condition. Many of the existing heritage attributes have been damaged or removed, including the original stucco, wood trim, and windows in many instances. Next slide, please. Just in terms of some recent consultation in advance of the public meeting we are holding tonight. We've had 2 meetings with the public, one being at the West Harbor Residents Association AGM on April 25th. We had about 100 residents attend that meeting, as well as a number of Q&As regarding the project. And then most recently on July 25th, we held a virtual public information meeting with over 40 attendees, also providing additional comments and feedback on the proposed application that's before council this evening. Next slide, please. So just in brief summary, obviously the building is a proposed 10-story mixed-use building. It's located in a growth area and designated Main Street 1, where the town anticipates contextually appropriate growth and change. We are providing new apartment housing with a variety of unit sizes. There's a new landscaped courtyard area that's associated with the development. A high-quality architectural design, materials, and landscaping is proposed. And the building does try to seek to respond to the climate objectives of the town. So this includes, we've delicately considered shadows, the public realm interface, parking being located below grade, the intention to install EV chargers, geothermal heating, as well as a green roof. And the building also does not feature a significant amount of glazing to allow for a high energy model building for the proposed development. Again, there's a greater setback that's provided adjacent to the low-rise areas from the previously approved development. And obviously the redevelopment of the site activates a vacant Main Street corner with new commercial space. Next slide, please. So that does conclude my presentation. Again, we really appreciate the opportunity to present the subject application. And we look forward to comments and questions from council as well as the public this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Demchuk. You obviously have learned our 10-minute rule to the second, and I congratulate you on that feat. Councillor Duddick and then Councillor Chisholm lined up for questions.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. Thank you very much for the presentation, Paul. I'm pleased that you did reference the various stages this development or this corner has gone through over the years. The one thing that I would draw to your attention is in each and every rendition that was presented, whether it was 4 stories and then 5 stories, the heritage home, which is a part 4, has always been retained. And to the point that when it wasn't in the best of condition, there was still an agreement whereby they were going to remove the heritage home off-site to provide for access for the bigger building, but also to restore and rebuild the what you call it house and bring it back to the site. I attended today the heritage visit on site, and while the outside has been stripped and left bare, there is quite a few salvageable things that were retained that are inside the house. So I don't want to mislead people thinking that because this has been left, it's not worth restoring. But again, there'll be a different process for that. The various renditions were 4, then 5. Can you remind us what the bonusing provision section 37 entailed with the 5-story one as of right?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm just going to pull up my notes here because I've got the details for those. So at the time that the zoning was approved, there was essentially 3 conditions that were included as part of the zoning at that time, and that are still within the site-specific provision within the Town of Oakville zoning bylaw. So those 3 provisions included 1, that the heritage conservation and restoration plan intended for the site be reincorporated, that the building achieve, and the second one being that the building achieve LEED Gold certification. And then finally that securities be posted to the town. This was in relation to the Section 37 agreement, in relation to the issuance for a building permit for the additional height that was proposed at that time.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I guess the one question I do have, and it was raised today at the meeting, the magnolia tree, which was a very prominent tree, and it was designated, and as you point out, it was not by your applicant, it was a previous applicant who damaged the tree. But there was, from what I understood, propagation done for that particular tree. Has your client pursued that?
Thank you, Councillor. So through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Duddick. So yes, and we are still pursuing that. We understand that there is a potential that, and sorry, I'm not an arborist, but essentially saplings of that tree are still potentially around, and as part of our landscape feature that we're proposing in the courtyard, there is an intention to provide for a new magnolia tree to be planted there. And that's one specific item that my client and the team is absolutely still looking into to try to make sure we try to find if there's any remnants of that tree that still exist. And Councillor, just to your point earlier, just on the Heritage House, I really appreciate the comment. It's absolutely something in terms of that existing house that exists that we will continue to look at. Notwithstanding that, obviously, you know, from a heritage best practice perspective, I know in speaking to the team, they would like to obviously a commemorative feature based on the condition of the home is recommended. It's something we will absolutely take back and discuss with the team.
I'm encouraged with that because I do note from your plan, there is still an opportunity, given that you have like a courtyard feature, that the house could still be there, given it's not a large building over top of it. Anyway, I'll leave that one. The privacy has been a concern that Councillor Chisholm and I have heard from numerous residents. You are abutting a residential area, and I appreciate the efforts you've taken in regards to that. Do any of these have balconies? What are the sight lines from the rear-facing units?
Absolutely. So through you, your worship, the Councillor Dudek. So as I mentioned, the existing building was a 0-meter setback up 5 stories. And so what we are looking at doing is providing a range of setbacks on the rear yard setback for the building. So at grade, it's 7.2 meters. It goes then to 6 meters for the next few floors, and then cascades back to 10-meter setback for some of the upper floors of the building. And I know there's a section drawing that's obviously been provided in the architectural plans to show and demonstrate what that looks like. But what we're also intending on doing is providing essentially landscape and green screening features for some of the balconies on that rear yard setback to mitigate privacy and overlook concerns, in addition to the setback that's being proposed to try to mitigate those impacts to the best extent possible.
What kind of recourse would the residents on the south side have if in fact the unit owners or renters of those units decided to remove the greenery?
It's a great question, Councillor. I haven't thought that through in detail. It's something I'm going to have to take back to the team and get back to you on that.
Yeah, because it sounds great, but then, as I say, for the long run, people may be impacted. So all the efforts that your client has taken may all be for naught. So I'll leave that one with you. The other two, in addition to concerns, there was Councillor Chisholm, myself, and the mayor who attended the very first West Harbor residents AGM, and people were very, very shocked, as you can imagine, knowing that they had already gone above the 4-story to provide permission for a 5-story, and then to hear that the client wanted to double that amount. And they were sort of left with the impression you were looking for feedback, acceptance, whatever, and you didn't get it. To the best of my recollection. But there were some people who are supportive. I won't say it's totally. Then we had the public information meeting. Similar sentiments were expressed. So regardless of what you've heard thus far in terms of the height that the residents have a concern about, there is no willingness to adapt going lower than the 10 stories.
Thank you for the question, Councillor. I think it's something I think we are absolutely willing to continue to discuss with planning staff, with council, and with my client on that. When I'm obviously looking at this from a built form and land use planning perspective, like we're obviously testing it on not only the like I mentioned, some of the policies and land use framework, but also from a design guideline and shadow perspective. And when we look at the site on terms of how it performs from a built form perspective, it actually performs quite well. But it's something that we can absolutely continue to look at, Councillor, to see what we can do, because I recognize there has been concerns with height in particular on some of the comments we received to date.
Okay. And the last point relates to traffic and parking. You mentioned you've had a traffic specialist look at this. Is there any kind of modifications to mitigate any of the concerns that the residents have voiced thus far regarding not only the traffic, but the parking down Chisholm and in the immediate area?
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. So I know we are providing, like obviously this 152 unit building. We are providing 183 parking spaces, of which 31 are visitor spaces for the proposed development. Obviously, from our traffic consultant's perspective, obviously this is an adequate amount of parking that's being provided for the proposed building. But notwithstanding that, I do obviously hear the concerns from the public. I hear the concerns about traffic and what's going to happen on some of their local streets. It's something that I think we can absolutely continue to look at and make sure we address those comments moving forward for the application.
So is the development incorporating parking for the commercial development?
So the intent is that the the visitor spaces would be both shared with the commercial spaces for both residential and commercial. And obviously there are a few commercial units being proposed along the Lakeshore Road frontage. which would also be utilized similar to other businesses along Lakeshore Road West in this context, with on-street parking abutting the site.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dudek. Councillor Chisholm?
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Dudek covered most of the questions I was going to ask too. However, I guess one main question, it seems to, through the history of this application, or excuse me, the project from 4 stories to 5 stories down to 10 stories. Paul, could you explain or give us some background why from originally it was, we were looking at 5, now it's 10, but the reasoning is behind going to a 10-story?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Chisholm, for the question. So there's obviously a changing landscape, as council is aware, in terms of some of the provincial policy changes. So Livable Oakville official plan was approved in 2010. The subject development was approved in 2009. Since that time, we obviously have a new PPS, we have a new growth plan, we have new housing targets that are provided by the region of Halton, as well as through Bill 23, in terms of obviously the goals by the province to achieve for more residential housing starts within the province. I believe the province's goal is to facilitate the construction of 1.5 million new homes by 2020-23, and Oakville's share of that, for lack of a better term, is approximately 33,000 homes. So when we look at from a policy perspective, and you look at where we can maybe contextually where we can develop contextually appropriate development, we're obviously looking at a site that it's a vacant corner. As you mentioned, it has a significantly storied history. And from a planning perspective, I'm obviously advising my client that I think this is potentially a good opportunity for providing for additional housing units in a site that warrants it in context. Obviously, I recognize there's a lot of concerns on the height, on the density that we have heard at some of the previous public information meetings. From my perspective, this building provides for an option for additional housing for people within the neighborhood, for the greater the benefit of the province. Oakville is a growing community. It's a significantly desirable place to live, as everyone on this call knows. And I think just being at a vacant site, we're providing for an attractive building. And I don't think people want to see it vacant for another 10 years, ideally.
Next question, Paul, with respect to the comments with respect to 33,000 units, livable units in Oakville, and our pledge and so forth, and making housing available. So let's talk about where the location is with respect to those units, and what would be the let's use the base charge for one of those units to purchase. What would be the starting rate?
Councillor, I would absolutely love to answer that question. How I have zero expertise on the market side of it, so I apologize. I'll have to get back to you on that.
Yeah, I think we need to get back on that, because the reality of it is, yes, I know we are always under the gun of affordable housing and supplying new living spaces and so forth, but under the umbrella of the provincial government, and what we're building here is not necessarily, I don't think it reflects the actual the goals set by the provincial government and the municipality with respect to affordable. So I'll leave it as that. The second part is with respect to, and I think Councillor Dudek did touch on it. Chisholm Street is very narrow. It is an old street, but it has heavy access now because of access to Tannery Park back and forth. It's a main straightaway to Tannery Park. Is the part of the application or development to look at how we mitigate the traffic congestion and issues with respect to where your entrance is on Chisholm, knowing full well that the street is very, very small, and how we improve or mitigate the traffic and that. So I think that's something going back to your team to look at, and how we deal with that. And just a point of interest, and when you made the indication where all the height of the buildings are, yes, they're across the street, and some of them have been there for many, many years, and some were built in the last 20 years, and they're very located in a very, what I call a comprehensive site. But when you come across to Lakeshore on the south side, You go from Foresight all the way to Brookfield, and I think the highest building we have is 3 stories. It's 1, 2, and 3. Putting a 10-story in the middle of this, I'm not sure if we have an issue of massing, and I know we have concerns about height and so forth, but I would really think about the height and how it works in with the existing neighborhoods and the existing area. So I'll just leave it as that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor.
Thank you, Councillor Chisholm. Mr. Demchuk, thank you for the time you took to bring us your information. Councillor Chisholm, would you just lower your little hand signal there, please?
Sorry, Your Worship, I just can't seem to find it at the bottom of my bar here.
All right, thank you. So, Madam Clerk, would you like to call the first or the next of the registered delegations, and then we'll poll the audience when we get through that list.
Mark Kajewski.
Here he is. Welcome,
Good
Mr.
evening.
Majewski. We can hear you, and we can see your avatar.
Oh, I guess there's no video that I can turn on, but that's my avatar.
That's all right.
Hopefully the presentation can go up that I created.
We can see it.
So first, I wanted to just thank everybody for the chance to speak. And I wish us as a community had the money to hire professional lobbyists. As we've just heard, they gave a very filtered view of, I think, what's going on. So if I can speak to the next slide, please. You know, this, as we know, and I'm not going to review things, that this was going to be 5 stories, 47 dwellings, which again, we have 36 dwellings on Chisholm Street. So that's almost a doubling of the density. And the 10-story building is a 500% increase. So this is biblical change. This isn't a small change, a small density in this area. And as it's already been saying, there's no buildings over 4 stories from 16 Mile Creek, south of Lakeshore, as far as the eye can see. So, and further than that, so it is not in view of the neighborhood. If I could flip to the next slide, please. So starting in March 2021, we've had these issues with Tannery Park. We brought the city, the police into it because it's the only destination park that goes through residential streets. Gridlock happens in the evenings, weekends, and holidays, not when traffic study was done, which is during rush hour. And it becomes so bad that residents can't leave their property. This is also a safety concern for ambulances, fire trucks. And we need a professional study, but if you stand on the street and count what's going down the street, 80% of the traffic on average is going to the park, not residents. And the town has tried many different things to reduce this gridlock, but it hasn't worked. Next slide, please. Everybody knows that, you know, Chisholm is the most direct way to Tannery Park. So that's the most used direction. Next slide, please. This is just an average Tuesday in July showing, you know, in both directions, absolute gridlock where we can't leave our homes, we can't move because, you know, it's just a mess because it's a narrow street and small changes make enormous differences. There's lots of pictures if you need them from other days. Next slide, please. And also the exit for this proposed 47 Lakeshore is right where there's 3 other entrances and exits, one from the townhouse unit I live in, one from the business unit next to it. So right there, you see anybody trying to turn left, right, it's just going to be a bottleneck even before you get out to the street. So it's just poor planning that it's not on Lakeshore or somewhere else. Next slide, please. Parking, you know, less 1 car per unit. shared with the businesses. It just doesn't make sense when you look at the property just south of it, which is, or just east of it, which is 40% of the size. It has 4 commercial units, needs 15 parking spots, was not allowed to put on a second story, and here we're talking about 10. So the rules have kind of very much changed, but I understand that's history. Next slide, please. The building itself, you know, there are newer buildings along Lakeshore that are all 3, 5 stories going west. They seem to be viable. They seem to be doing everything that has to happen. If you were to put on your reading glasses, you might see a small sliver of grass that they're proposing in this particular design. And that is a problem because this is a green area and they're trying to maximize profits by going to all corners. The shadow study is not done during the winter, which is the most important time. It's 10 blocks, so the shadows will be very long. And I want to point out that on the northeast corner is Kensington, the seniors' home, which has a half-acre park on the roof, 3 stories up, 2 stories up. That will be in the dark most of the day in the winter. So that building is not only for the residences, but all those seniors that live there, they're going to be living in the shade from now on in the winter. Next slide, please, because I don't want to repeat things. So the conclusion is that in this particular time, the developer, the consultant, you know, they've talked to us 3 times, but they basically told us what they want to do. They have had no room for consulting to understand what we really need. What is Tannery Park? Where is the closest bus? All of these things have not been considered. And we want that development to happen. We'd be happy with a nice 5-story development that doubles the population of Chisholm Street, but we don't need a biblical change to increase someone's profits. And we want this to reflect the character and the value of our community. So thank you for your time. I'm only going to use half mine. I hope you're happy with that, Mayor Burton, but I want to move on so that other people could speak too.
Thank you, Mr. Majewski, very much for the concision. You may be able to hear in the background your fellow residents breaking our rule against public displays of affection. at which council
I
is.
have one other comment. They talked about the privacy south, but what about east and west? There's no setbacks. So I'm on the east side. It's going to be a straight monolithic 10-story building with no privacy. They've had some small setback to the south. They're not looking at the legal setbacks all around and giving the rest of the community privacy.
Right. Well, thank you for that extra note. As I explained at the start of the meeting, the planning director and his staff are busy writing down the planning issues they can identify in people's presentations. And I'm actually keeping track myself. I'll add setback to the east and west to my list. And I'm sure the planners, if they hadn't already, they now will. So, like I said, thank you very much for your presentation. Madam Clerk, would you call the next registered delegation, please?
Kurt Strobel.
Mr. Strobel, we are looking for you on this screen. Madam Clerk, have you brought him into the meeting? Oh, here we go.
Your worship, I don't think Mr. Strobel's on this item. He's on 2370 Lakeshore Road West.
All right.
It even says 6.1, but I think that's an error.
All right. Madam Clerk, I'm going to skip over this listing, and maybe you can call Gerald Weiner. is Mr. Weiner here?
No, virtually, no. Oh, here he is. He's in person.
Oh, here we have Mr. Weiner. Gerald Weiner, welcome. So if you speak into the microphone, there's a fighting chance that everybody will be able to hear you.
Thank you. Am I close enough?
You're perfect.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your time. My name is Gerald Weiner. I'm one of the longest residents in Oakville as far as living on Walker Street. And and I appreciate the council's wisdom on helping us adjust to the lighting that was placed on that magnificent walkway, because it was like having spotlights in our bedrooms every night. And we were able to, your wisdom, to have them painted black, the lighting, so that was a big help. So the council really stepped up for us. Hopefully you'll consider the last gentleman that spoke. He said many of the things much more eloquently than I could regarding my deepest concern of having a 10-story building in a magnificent city, Oakville, in that arena, because that's a residential arena. And I know I'm an entrepreneur. I admire men and women that vision and visualize, but it's called a balance. And what's happened, Tannery Park is wonderful, but it's become a huge magnet, difficult for cars to get in and out. My wife and I don't bike ride anymore as much as we did, a little bit, because it's dangerous. There's just so many cars and not enough space for all of them to do what they need to do when they need to do it. And at night, the cars go back and forth on these various streets, and it's hard. But it's a lovely park, and it was an asset to the city. But another 100 some odd cars, all these people in these small streets, I think we've really reached a maximum. Maybe 5 stories would be the solution. It'd be beautiful and it would fit in. But I think we have to take the balance of living the beautiful life in Oakville and that area that we live in. We love it. 30 years is a long time. I think it's 33 years, but at my age, 30 and 33, it doesn't make any difference anymore. But I think there's a balance, and if we could find that balance, I think it would be a real wise move, because I'd like to see something on that empty lot. I've watched it for many, many years, and I saw they spent a huge amount of money on a sign, but they never built a building. And that's really all I have to say. I didn't do any statistics. I just felt my feelings, and I wanted to share them because it's just the right building at the wrong size, at the wrong place, maybe at the right time. Somehow there's got to be a balance. Thank you very much, and I appreciate your time very, very much, sir.
Thank you for coming and sharing your thoughts.
You're welcome, sir.
More support. Madam Clerk, do you have another registered delegation?
I do, Mr. Mayor. On the phone, we have Manilo Mariscotti.
I'm seeing Manlio Mariscotti, and however you want it to, but that's what I'm seeing. You're welcome, and if you unmute yourself, we may be able to hear you. And if it helps, you can try *6 to mute and unmute, I'm told. I'm not vouching for that. Mr. Mariscotti, assuming you can hear me, we cannot hear you. So, do you have others?
Oh, wait, he's coming in.
Oh, look at that, he's unmuted. All right.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you very well.
Yes. Hello, Thank you, Your Worship and councillors. My neighbor and I. Can you hear me? We can hear you. Yes. Thank you. I can hear you as well. My neighbor and I had canvassed some of our neighborhood with a petition. And the petition was really intended to highlight some of the issues that have been addressed earlier, primarily that of traffic, the density, and the proposed height. We were canvassing a block at a time. We didn't do every household, but I will say that based on the people that we spoke to, nearly everyone was in favor of signing the petition, and we've submitted those to the planning department for their record. I think it's important to note that people were not against the development per se. What they were opposed to was the scale of the changes that were being proposed in the amendment. And I think that was where people felt that it was going too far in terms of the 10 stories, the 152 houses. Paul, I appreciate the presentation that you did. As you said, there were some public hearings, information hearings, the AGM in April, and then the virtual hearing in July. I think as Councillor Dudek pointed out, there has been, and this is one of the things that we learned when we went door to door, there was some frustration in terms of the concerns that had been expressed at those 2 hearings were never adequately addressed. Not at the hearing, but not at the subsequent sessions. And even today, I don't think they have been addressed. And I think and Councillor Chisholm brought up the point about the rental rates and how this has all been underwriting. And in my mind anyway, I would believe that as the project goes forward, there would have been that exercise undertaken in terms of what are the assumptions in terms of rental rates, how does this all work? You changed the unit sizes, you made them obviously smaller, et cetera. I think also in the presentation, there were examples that were cited, and one in particular, the 6 John Street, which is 17 stories, 350 units. I think it's worth pointing out that that was done in 1979. So I think all the development plans and strategy for the town have evolved since that time. And so it may not be, it is out there. It stands out like a sore thumb, if you will, but it may not be as relevant. I look at the Lions Club, the dog guide, redevelopment, which is on a much larger site, and that is only going to be 6 stories, 230 units, and because of the nature of the occupants, it's only got 110 parking spots. So again, much smaller in terms of the parking and presumably much less traffic impact. I think it's important just to point out that, again, we're not opposed to the development. It's really the scale of it. I think when we talk about the stories and the number of stories that are being permitted, if in fact it was 4 stories initially and then there was a variance given to make it 5 stories, I think the other key fact is the number of meters, which I understand at the 5 stories was 18 meters, and now I think we're looking at 38 meters. And I don't know if that's correct, but that's what I've heard. So again, that's a significant variance. So again, I appreciate all the input that we've been able to provide. I think the concern remains, yes, go ahead with the development, but the scale of development has to be consistent with what was initially zoned for, and there could be a slight variance, but not as significant as is being suggested. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Council appreciates the time you took to bring your information, and so do your neighbors. Madam Clerk, any others?
Nope, you can pull the audience.
All right. There being no further delegations, I'll confine it to table. Members of council, do any of you have any issues to add to the issues list? I would suggest that I think every conceivable issue has been named, but you can surprise me. Councillor Chisholm.
Through you, Your Worship, just one question. I'd like to know what the setback is from the front sidewalk area, what the setback of the building will be.
Mr. Demchak, can you answer that question?
Yes, so through you, Your Worship, there's a varied setback. It's right at the corner of Lakeshore Road and Chisholm. We are providing a 0-meter setback. So what we're doing is providing a street wall consistent with many of the other commercial buildings at least along the commercial frontage of the property. And then it obviously sets back towards the courtyard. I don't have the exact dimensions available right now, but it's something I could absolutely provide.
Please do. I appreciate that. So there's no soft landscaping in front at all. Is that correct?
So there's no soft landscaping, at least on the frontage of the building. It's intended to be essentially hardscape to provide for commercial entrances, to provide for more of an urban streetscape, at least along the Lakeshore Road frontage.
Just a question to go back to the team to have that consider that with respect to where we're going with green infrastructure and drainage and everything else. We could only put so much concrete and asphalt down till such time we have issues with water. So that's consideration of your team to look at that. Maybe some soft landscaping be appropriate for that development. Thank you.
Absolutely, Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chisholm. Any other members of council with issues to add to the list? All right. Perhaps a member of council would like to move that the comments from the public with respect to the proposed official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment applications be received and staff consider such comments as may be provided by council. Councillor Chisholm, thank you. Council, before I call a vote on that, are you content to do it this way, or would you like me to ask the planning director to stand up and name all the issues he heard here? All right. Is there any objection to Councillor Chisholm's motion? There being none, Madam Clerk, that carries. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, everybody. I paused to ask the residents of the area if you would like us to take a 5-minute bio break so that you can leave in an orderly fashion if you were intending to leave. If, on the other hand, you think we're entertaining enough to stay, you're welcome to stay. All right, I'll have a 5-minute recess.
You can't change the channel, I guess.
Council, we are ready to resume. And when enough pictures have lit up to equal quorum, I'll resume the meeting. Bingo, we're there. All right, council is back in session after a brief recess to facilitate some changes of seats in the council chamber by the public. And now, what we need to do is we need to turn to our first discussion item, and that's consideration of the objection to our notice of intention to designate the Peak House at 383 Douglas Avenue. And the staff, in the person of Carolyn Van Slichtenhorst, are available for any questions. And you have the material, and the agenda's indicated motion is that the notice of intention to designate the Peak House at 383 Douglas Avenue under Section 29, Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act be maintained despite the notice of objection received from the property owner, and that the bylaw 2023-155 to designate the Peak House at 383 Douglas Avenue as a property of cultural heritage value or interest be passed. Councillor Dudek.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd be pleased to give you a motion to approve the recommendation from staff that we proceed with the designation.
Thank you. Council, is there an objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, there being no objection, that is carried. 7.2 is consideration of the objection to our notice of intention to designate the Bentley Family Farmhouse at 3444 Trafalgar Road. And we have a registered delegation, Catherine Meager in person, who has a presentation, and Carolyn Van Slichtenhorst is available for questions. Ms. Meager, you are on. If you'll speak into the microphone, everybody who needs to hear you will hear you.
I believe, Your Worship, I'm the next agenda item, 7.3, 356 Watson.
Oh, how did we get that one wrong? Well, I tell you what, since you're there, I'm happy to consider that now and set down the Bentley Family Farmhouse.
Okay.
And
makes sense.
And we'll hear you now.
Okay. So good evening. My name is Catherine Maher. I am speaking to agenda item 7.3, which is 356 Watson Avenue. I want to thank Council for the opportunity to present this evening and thank planning staff for their help in answering questions throughout this process. I do only have 10 minutes, so I'm going to speak quickly, and apologies for that. Our appeal is based on two grounds. The principal ground is that Council did not duly consider the verbal arguments which we advanced at the Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee on July 25th or before this Council on August 14th. For this appeal, we have prepared a detailed written submission, which is the second attachment to agenda item 7.3. I hope Council found this helpful and that it permitted a more studied examination of our arguments. When we filed our appeal of the notice of intention to designate 356 Watson Avenue, we asked for a thorough response to the arguments we raised. We have reviewed the October 31st report from the Planning Services Department and find the responses are unconvincing. With respect to the first ground of appeal, the property is slated for designation based on the fulfillment of 4 criteria under Ontario Regulation 9-06. Our appeal stated that there is inadequate evidence and a lack of precision in the original Cultural Heritage Evaluation Report with respect to the analysis of each of these criteria. The October 31st report attempts to provide further evidence and precision, but we find instead that there are reassertions without new evidence. I will briefly speak to the 4 criteria examined in both our appeal and the October 31st report. The first criterion is that the house is a representative example of an early 1900s craftsman-style home. We noted in our appeal that the original report lacked precision as to whether the home was an early or a representative example. At page 3 of the October 31st report, staff notes that this has been clarified through a revision to the SCVHI and that the house is a representative example. Although staff notes that this is a minor revision, with respect, it is not minor to us. We did not see the October 31st report until the clerk sent tonight's agenda on November 10th. We were not provided with any notice of this change or the updated SCHVI. The goalpost was changed on us, and now that we know what the town's argument is with respect to Ontario Regulation 9-06, Section 1, Sub 1, we have no opportunity to make investigations of our own, to engage our own experts, or to do our own further research. Even though we did not know the precise nature of the town's argument, we did note in our appeal that the property is not suitable or convincing representative example given the many changes that have occurred to this property. This argument is addressed by staff in the October 31st report by 2 points. The first point raised at page 4 of the report is that the rear of the house has not been included in the designation bylaw. In reviewing the proposed bylaw, this is not immediately clear. For example, the bylaw refers to the rear dormer as being included. Greater clarity is needed in the wording of the bylaw to show that the rear of the home is indeed excluded. Again, the lack of precision makes it difficult to form arguments for appeal or to understand what our goalposts are. The second point raised by staff is that the changes to the front of the building have not resulted in loss of the overall cultural value of the building. We submit there is a lack of evidence to support this claim. There are no photos of this building from the time it was built. There are no architectural drawings or building permits. How do we even know that the current iteration of the front of the building resembles what it was when it was first built? We have seen other Brantwood homes in books, in the brochure for the Brantwood survey, but 356 Watson Avenue never comes up. There isn't even clarity as to when it was built. At page 2 of the report, it is referred to as a circa 1915 home. MPAC listed as a 1918 home. If there isn't even a known date for the year it was built, and there seems to be no documentary evidence to support its cultural importance, then we question how it is a convincing representative example of a craftsman home. The second criterion under the regulation is that the house has direct associations with the theme of the development of Brantwood. We disagree with staff that the development of a subdivision is a theme. Municipal expansion in the form of a subdivision seems to be a stretch when it comes to the word theme. Would any of us consider the subdivisions being built today a theme or thematic development? Likely not. In our appeal, we asked for evidence of how a subdivision development constitutes a theme. We had hoped to see some judicial consideration of the term theme in the context of cultural designations in Ontario, or perhaps a legal interpretation or an academic examination, so that we could understand this argument. There is no such evidence provided. The onus is on the town and this council to provide convincing arguments that the criteria and the regulation is met, and here we remain unconvinced and find that this is a reassertion rather than new evidence. A final criterion is that the property has contextual value because it maintains and supports the character of the area. We noted in our appeal that there is little that the preservation of this building can do to support or maintain the complexion of a neighborhood that has fundamentally changed, particularly in the last 10 years. In response to this argument, the report acknowledges the changes in Brantwood and argues that this underscores the importance of conserving the heritage homes that remain. However, this goal does not correspond with the wording in this section of the legislation. The regulation states that the property should maintain or support the character of an area, not conserve any older homes in a neighborhood regardless of what the area's character has become. The key word here is character. What is the character of Brantwood? Today, it is no longer historic or reflective of what Brantwood was originally meant to be. It is increasingly modern and continually filled with new, extremely modern developments. If I could have slide 2 up, please. This is our neighbor to the south at 350 Watson Avenue. Please take a look. If I could have slide 4, please. This shows more of the streetscape directly to the south of the property. When I presented before the Heritage Committee, one of the members of the committee abstained from the vote to designate this property. When we spoke following the meeting, the member indicated that after the modern home was built at 350 Watson, it no longer made sense to designate 356. Why? Because the character is no longer there in the way that the legislation demands. When you look at these slides, is Brantwood's character historic in the way that the cultural evaluation report suggests? We submit that it is not. Since I made my first submissions this past summer, even more development has occurred, and there are modern building projects all over Brantwood which further erode any historic remnants of what it once was. For designation to make sense today, we believe that council should have acted years ago to maintain Brantwood's historic character, perhaps by designating more Part 4 homes if it wasn't going to create a heritage district under Part 5. That did not occur, and so designating older homes in Brantwood now fails to achieve the legislative objective of supporting the character of an area, and also fails to strike an appropriate balance between cultural preservation and individual property rights. I see I don't have time to address the second ground of appeal, which is that the proposed designation violates principles of procedural fairness. The report notes that this ground falls outside the scope of Ontario Regulation 9-06 and what they as staff can consider when determining what properties to designate. It is my understanding, however, that this Planning Council as an administrative body is bound to uphold principles of procedural fairness, and I urge Council to review the arguments relevant to this point in our appeal. To conclude, we request that this council withdraw the notice of intention to designate 356 Watson Avenue. The onus is on council to show that the legislative criterion set out in the regulation are met. They are not in the case of 356 Watson Avenue, and so designation is not suitable or justified in this case. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present for you this evening.
Thank you very much for the obvious effort that went into such a concise rendition of so many arguments.
Thank you.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Lichtenhorst, I believe council would like to hear from you to see if you can provide us with any insight here.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'm happy to answer any questions. Just to speak to some of those points raised by Ms. Maher, we do have more information in the original research report in terms of background, the construction date of 1914, 15, et cetera. One of the points raised was the idea of the theme. It's staff's view that there is this theme or event that's also included in Regulation 906 of the development of Brantwood, of this area, which was really contextually important and historically important to Oakville, as it really took Oakville from a small town to a larger town, and with lots of new development and new people coming in from larger cities and building homes and bringing new professionals in, which expanded the town. So this to us was a theme and an event, and a larger event that happened within Oakville that was important. And this is one of those homes that is representative of that theme. And speaking again to the contextual piece, the defining or maintaining, supporting the character of the area, staff feels that the property does help define, maintain, and support the character of the neighborhood. It is true that Brantwood is unique in that it has different timelines of development. We had the original buildings from the arts and crafts era of the original portion of Brantwood. And then, of course, as lots got subdivided over time, new houses have gone in and been built. And so it's staff's view that it's not an area that is worthy of protection under the Heritage Act as a heritage district, but that we want to maintain what we're calling these anchors, these arts and crafts anchors of the neighborhood. And we do still feel that these do help define the character of the neighborhood. When you're driving through Brantwood, there is a variety of architectural styles and eras, but you have a lot of these large arts and crafts homes, many of them on the corner or close to the corner like this one, that really do define the character of the area as you're going through, along with the large trees and large lots. So From our perspective, we have not changed our recommendation. We have not changed any of our opinions on any of the original information that was in the research report. There was a clarification regarding the early and representative. It was meant to say early in Oakville. We did take it out because it's not a very early example throughout North America of an arts and craftsman house, but within Oakville it certainly was. But in line with Regulation 906, it is a representative example, and so we clarified that. And provided a little bit more information in our staff report, but I'm happy to answer any questions if I haven't covered anything.
Councillor Dudek has something for us, but, and Councillor Dudek, I'll go to you, and then I have a question or two for you. Councillor Dudek.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. Carolyn, when you reference themes, having seen numerous reports you've provided to the Oakville Heritage Committee over the years, we saw pamphlets, booklets for the Brantwood survey, for Tuxedo Park. Is that sort of the theme that you're referencing? Because they were promoted at the time as being a certain, as you say, promotion for the town of Oakville, for people to come and actually live here versus just vacationing for a cottage.
Yes, through your worship to Councillor Dudek, those documents are really helpful in really underscoring the importance of these neighborhoods. It was Brantwood specifically in this case. It was really advertised outside of Oakville to be this really important special, new subdivision, but also really trying to put Oakville on the map. And that was a big piece, again, taking Oakville from this sort of smaller, sleepy town throughout the 1800s to the early 1900s, and having this big shift where you have a lot new development, a lot new of people, and of course, commercial enterprises that come from that. So we do have a lot of fantastic evidence that shows how significant this development was. And so this is a part of Oakville's history that we're trying to capture in a built form that is still representative and indicative of that original arts and crafts development. That hopefully answers that question.
Thank you. Yes, it does. Just the other question, because it seems to have come up periodically, whereby because you haven't created a district, it's not worth saving something. Is that not why we do a part 4, meaning it's the property itself versus a district? That it's based on the merits of that particular home versus a streetscape like you would get in the district?
Correct, through your worship to Councillor. So in this case, we really are looking at the individual property, and we're really using the architectural style and the design of the building. That is one of the criteria that is met from Regulation 906. We are looking at it individually as a building that's important on its own, but we also feel like it has contextual merit in terms of how its context around and where it sits within Brantwood subdivision. But yes, you're correct. We're not looking at all of the streetscape as a whole to designate the entire area. We're really looking at designating this based on its merits individually, but the individual merits also include its importance in that contextual neighborhood of Brantwood.
Okay. The other point that was raised was regarding the change in some of the recently developed properties of a more modern context. I know, for instance, in the old Oakville district, we have some homes, or did have some homes, that were built, say, in the 1960s, early 70s. Even though they were, I don't want to say modern, they didn't merit a Part 4 designation, and we can't prevent them from being developed on its own merit. So I'm a little concerned that showing a picture of a modern home, we don't know the age of the home that was being developed. In other words, it could have been a 1960s, 1970s that had already had the development take place. And so you can't compare apples to apples in this sort of situation unless you know the age of the home when it was built, correct?
Correct. Is this regarding the house just next door to, yes. So that one, we do not have any photos of the house that was there before. We do know from fire insurance maps that there was a house that was built there right after the subject house at 356, but we're not entirely sure if that was still there. I do know the one that was replaced in 2005, it was replaced before the Ontario Heritage Act changes were in place, specifically the ones in 2006, which created that 60-day requirement for demolition for listed properties. So that is why, of course, that one was demolished and not this one. If when we were adding properties to the register, adding this subject property to the register, if there was a very similar one next door, it would have been included. But I do not have photos of the one that was demolished. But unfortunately, it was gone before we could have saved it just because of the legislative changes.
I was just going to say, and speaking on the legislative changes, the fact that we're bringing forth all these designations is due to the recent changes at the provincial level, that we have a finite amount of time by which we can actually designate these before they do get lost. Is that not correct?
That is correct. So as of January 1st, 2025, which is just over a year away, this property will be removed, will have to be removed from the register, so it will have no heritage status unless it was designated before that time. So if it is not designated by then, a demolition permit could be issued for the house after January 1st, 2025.
Thank you very much. So you're still standing by your professional opinion that this does in fact merit designation?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dudek. Ms. Lichtenhorst, is a way of thinking of that change a use your power by a certain time or lose it?
Through your worship, there will still be an ability to designate a property after January 1st, 2025.
No,
but
I meant if you've listed it and you haven't acted, then
correct.
Have you lost your chance?
You could still designate in the future, but if you do not designate within a quick enough time and a demolition permit was applied for, you would have to issue that building permit, and there would not be sufficient time to designate.
Right. Councillor O'Meara, I still have some questions, but Councillor O'Meara, you're up.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, and just quick, the delegate had said that they didn't receive certain information or weren't notified until the report was brought forward here. What is our responsibility to notify the owner of a home with regards to the information that we've got on their heritage property?
So through your worship to the councillor, we are not under the Ontario Heritage Act. The notification is really just the notification requirement after council moves to issue notice of intention to designate, which was complete, and after council issues or passes the bylaw. Staff did go beyond that, and we have been in regular contact with the owner. So we did email the owner after council moved to issue the notice of intention to designate and give the opportunity to come to the meeting tonight because they did submit their objection. So letting them know that their objection letter would be reviewed tonight at this meeting, and then the agenda and everything, of course, is available online.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, Ms. Lichtenhorst, I noted in the report, sorry, Councillor Haslett-Thiel.
I hope this works. My question is, the delegate mentioned a need for clarity about the rear of the home. And I just want to make sure that clarity is there. Is the rear of the home designated?
So through your worship to Councillor Haslett-Thiel, the attributes, the way they've defined, we did not include the fenestration at the rear of the home. So fenestration, we mean the window openings and the doors. So we did cover essentially the box, the original square portion of the house. There is a rear wing on the back of the house that was not included as well, that was later added. I would note the owner's correct that the two dormers are included in the attributes, the one at the front and the one at the rear, essentially because just the way the roof is, it's sort of incorporated into the main roof of the existing building. However, anything beyond that, the rear addition was not, or any of the fenestration and details on the back of the house were not included. So the reason we do that is to allow owners more flexibility if they would like to, remove that rear wing that was added and to add a new addition. Typically, what people want to do in their homes is to, add a rear addition and add more space at the rear. So essentially, what you have at the rear is not included to allow for that flexibility of new construction in the future.
So thank you very much for that clarification. So is there an opportunity to document that in a more precise way for the residents so that they're more comfortable with where we're headed?
There is an option to amend the bylaw. That's always an option if that is something, if council was to pass the bylaw tonight. And of course, we are running low on time. So if council does pass the bylaw tonight, we could in the future always work with the owner to amend the bylaw. That's a fairly simple process to do. So that's something that can be considered for sure.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you, Councillor. All right, I'm down to two questions. First, I noted in the report that the property was previously listed as a property of interest, and so it was known on the public record that this was a potential heritage designation. When was that listed as a property of interest?
Your Worship, I believe that was 2009.
Okay. Thank you for that. And then with respect to amending the bylaw, I'm wondering if there's any need to update the report to reflect the new information you mentioned earlier when you first began presenting to council.
Sorry, just which information could you clarify?
All I noted down was that you mentioned that you had updated information.
Oh, sorry, Your Worship, that was just regarding between the initial stages and between where we are now. We had updated things, the removal of the word early, just to say representative. So that's already been done in the attached bylaw.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's no further changes as of tonight.
All right. And how long, what is your deadline?
The deadline for the bylaw to be passed, just looking in the staff report here, is December 14th, so coming up soon. And that's the deadline for council to make a decision on the notice of objection and to pass a designation bylaw.
Okay, so how long would it take you to produce the indicated amended bylaw to reflect greater precision on the fenestration at the rear?
That could be done by the next council meeting on December 4th, if I believe that's at the next P&D meeting. That is possible, which would make the timeline.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Duddick?
I'd be pleased to give you a motion in that regard, Your Worship, that it return with the appropriate revisions, amendments.
All right. Could I state that as you're moving that we refer the draft bylaw to staff for an amendment to increase the precision on the requirement of, to increase the precision of the reference to the fenestration at the rear. And I'm looking to Ms. Lichtenhorst to tell me whether that's a good wording or not.
Sorry, Your Worship, could you just repeat that? We were just discussing over here.
I believe council would like to refer the bylaw back to you and staff to amend the provisions about the fenestration at the rear to reflect the discussion that you gave us tonight.
That wording would work. Currently, the fenestration on the rear is not included already. So I don't know if I need more clarification on what.
Oh, the request, I guess, was
dormer?
To explicitly state that it's not included. I suppose that's belt and suspenders.
Yeah.
But I think council's in the mood to do that. And so we're wanting to make sure that we get the right wording so that we don't mess it up.
Sure, we can take that back, and I think that wording works. Yeah, we can take that back.
All right. Councillor Dudek, thank you for the motion. Is there a member of council who would object to the motion? Madam Clerk, the motion carries. Thank you, everybody. Now let's return to the Bentley Family Farmhouse, on which I guess we do not have a listed delegation.
Correct.
All right. And the clerk and I apologize for any confusion we may have inadvertently caused. Ms. Lichtenhorst, you may as well stay there because there could be questions on this item as well. Councillor Dudek.
I will give you a motion to approve the staff recommendation.
All right. I see nodding heads from people I know to have an interest in Trafalgar Township's built cultural heritage. Is there any objection to that motion? Madam Clerk, there is no objection, and that motion is carried as well. The next item is 7.4. The motion is that Council directs staff to engage in consultation regarding the town's Parks Plan 2031 updated and draft parkland dedication bylaw as set out in the report from the Planning Services Department. And we have a presentation from our planning director, Mr. Gabe Charles. Mr. Charles, you have the floor and our attention.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, just provide a bit of context on this particular matter. We do have a presentation from the town's planning consultant, Mr. Ron Palmer from the Planning Partnership. And I'm sure council is aware that Bill 23 has significantly affected the way in which we do our land use planning now in this province. One of the major changes that came from that was the way in which we use our growth funding tools, including parkland dedication. And council had approved that parkland dedication bylaw in September of 22. And there were some appeals to that bylaw, and while we were reviewing those appeals, Bill 23 had been presented to the legislature, and ultimately this part of the bill had received royal assent. And as such, we need to go back to consider the implications of that new legislation to the parkland dedication bylaw. So we're bringing this report forward now, as we've spent the past year working with the consulting team to update the Parks Plan 2031, which recognizes those changes to the Planning Act, and informs our updated parkland dedication bylaw, which has been attached in draft to the staff report. And before we do provide a final version of this bylaw, the legislation does require some consultation with the school boards and with public bodies. We've had some of those conversations already. We have others to go, including this coming Thursday, where there is a public session which has been planned. So as I mentioned, just wanted to provide some context to this evening's presentation. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Palmer.
Thank you, Gabe. I do have a presentation. Gabe did a great job introducing the issue. If you want to go to the next slide, please. I was before you last on April 9th, 2022, where we talked about Parks Plan 2031 and the implementing Parkland Dedication Bylaw and Parkland Dedication Procedure Manual. You did approve the Parkland Dedication Bylaw on September 12th of 2022. As Mr. Charles identified, there were some appeals to that bylaw from the development industry, build, as well as some individual developers in Oakville appealed that bylaw. And as Mr. Charles mentioned, shortly thereafter, the province came out with Bill 23. Interestingly enough, many of the issues raised, not all, but many, raised by the appellants have been fundamentally addressed by those legislative changes in Bill 23. Next slide. So today I'm providing a very brief overview of the revised parks plan that has been adjusted to reflect the updated legislative framework of Bill 23. That parks plan has been used to update the associated parkland dedication bylaw, and along with staff, we're continuing to review the procedural manual that goes along with the implementation tools that you have. Next slide. We've been on an interesting journey on parkland dedication with multiple changes to the Planning Act as we've worked through this process, always starting with sections 42 and 51 of the Planning Act. Those numbers haven't changed, but certainly through Bill 73, Bill 197, Bill 109, next slide. And then Bill 23, we've been playing catch up to the provincial legislative changes as we've worked through this process. I will note that Bill 23 is a pretty significant change to the way planning is done in this province. And it certainly has a big impact on parkland dedication because fundamentally Bill 23 is an effort to contain development cost with respect to some of the tools that the municipality can use to generate revenue through the development approval process. Certainly the Parks Plan 2031 has to recognize provincial legislation and implement those changes from Bill 23, which I'll talk about on the next couple of slides. Next slide. Thank you. First of all, some things that stayed the same. Parkland dedication for industrial and commercial development has not changed. It's at 2%. And the baseline residential parkland dedication of 5% has not changed. However, the alternate residential rate, which really comes into play as densities increase, so we consider these applicable in your strategic growth areas, not your traditional neighborhoods, but those have been changed dramatically. First of all, the rate of 1 hectare per 600 dwelling units has been basically cut in half. Before Bill 23, it was 1 hectare per 300 units. The other really important part is that while through the use of 1 hectare per 600 dwelling units, as densities increase in specific areas, eventually you get to a point where the next parts of the new legislation come into play, and those are absolute caps on development sites based on the size of the site. So on sites less than 5 hectares, you're limited to a maximum of 10% of the value of the land, or 10% of the land itself. And on larger sites, greater than 5 hectares, you can achieve up to 15% of the value of the land, or 15% of the land. So basically for residential development, we have the baseline of 5%, which works just fine for lower density residential neighborhoods. Then we have 1 hectare per 600, which starts to generate much more parkland in your strategic growth areas, up to a point where it is then capped by the 10% and 15% values. Next slide. There is a policy direction in Bill 23 that says you need to spend or allocate 60% of the funds that are in your cash in lieu account at the beginning of the year. Notwithstanding that allocate is not a defined term yet, that's an important principle requiring the municipality to think about how you're going to spend the cash in lieu that you have in your cash in lieu account. There's also provisions for what they call flexible parklands, and that's non-traditional ownership models and how those count towards the achievement of parkland dedication. There is a requirement to count both strata parks and POPs, which are privately owned public spaces with legal agreements. It doesn't tell us yet how to do that or if there is a discount. We have been patiently awaiting regulations from the province to provide further instructions on how the town is going to deal with credit for strata parks and POPs. Next slide. As I mentioned, there are two companion documents that come from the recommendations of the Parks Plan. One is the Parkland Dedication Bylaw itself. You have one before you. It talks about the definitions, how it's applied, how park conveyance is calculated, dealing with credits where credit is due, how payment in lieu of land is to be dealt with, and how land value is to be determined. And then there's some administrative elements. I did talk about the Parkland Dedication Procedural Manual, and it has a number of related topics. It talks about your active parkland target. It talks about the difference between suburban park hierarchies and a more urban park hierarchy. Talks about all the options for ownership, fee simple, strata parks, and POPs. Calculation of the conveyance, exemptions and reductions where those are appropriate. What land is acceptable as parkland and what land is not, and how to utilize the payments in lieu. Next slide, please. It's the last slide. Where are we today? We have a draft Parks Plan 2031 available for review, and we're looking for some direction to go out and talk about that document with school boards, representatives of the development community, including Build, as well as the public. Following those consultation events, we expect that there will be further revisions to the Parks Plan, and that will trigger further revisions to the Parkland Dedication Bylaw and Procedural Manual. Once that is all done, we expect to be back before Council looking for approval of the Parkland Dedication Bylaw. And with that, I am happy to try and answer any questions you might have. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Mr. Palmer, thank you very much. You've generated a few questions. I just wonder, before you end your presentation, I'd like to hear from you about the time sensitivity of this process. What happens presently until we get this new measure in place?
Excellent question. I think I would need to rely on your legal counsel to tell me what is the interim measure. My expectation is that you can't use the alternative rate until you have a bylaw that empowers you to do so.
That sounds like a pretty concise definition. Mr. Solicitor, are you able to add anything to that?
Thank you, Mayor Burton. There's also a provision in the Planning Act that says your bylaw is deemed to be amended to the extent that it contravenes the act, so that any provisions that are contrary in the bylaw are overridden by the legislation. And I know that Mr. Biggert is online as well. He's the legal counsel that we have retained in respect of this process and with respect to the outstanding appeals. And I'll just ask Mr. Biggert if he has anything further to add.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Fortunately, at this point, I have nothing to add. I think it's all been covered by the two previous speakers. So unless you have any questions of me on that point, I don't think I can add anything further.
Thank you very much to both of you. Please stand by. We've got at least 3 councillors with questions. Councillor Elgar, Councillor Giddings, and Councillor O'Meara. Councillor Elgar.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Burton.
Ron, I'd like to thank you for that report. I don't know whether anybody's taken the time to read the 222 pages, but it's one of the best reports if I've ever read, if anybody takes the time to read each page. What it really highlights is that what the provincial government has done has really hurt us going forward to provide what we should be providing to the people. You covered it well. Bill 73, Bill 1097, Bill 109, Bill 23. And as I read through, where I'm really interested, one of the things is page 44 of your report, where you go through a 10,000 square meter site. And you point out of density, which we seem to be into now, at 1 FSI, floor space index. So if we have a floor space index of 10,000 square meters, or a site area, that gives us 0.17 acres of land in total. If we go to 5, ballpark, we can get 1/4 of an acre for parks for everybody. If we go to 10, we can get 1/2 an acre. A football field is over an acre. Now, does that give you an idea of what 10 FX is? Nobody understands it in Oakville, I don't think. But this report, if people really look at the calculations, they will understand it. The other thing in the report, which really, it jumped out at me, which I didn't realize, this whole report is really about, in my opinion, the Uptown Core, Midtown, and Bronte. Because on page 39, you state, it is important to note that North Oakville planning area is subject to its own master plan parkland dedication agreement, and no recommendation in the parks plan is designed to impact that agreement. Now, is that correct? So basically south of Dundas, pretty well, we're built out for most of the area. But so what you're telling me, even though this report is 222 pages, it's really about intensification, with Midtown being the first on the block. Is that what you would read it also? Is that what you're saying?
To you, Mr. Mayor, I think you've hit it just about right. It is about intensification. It is about your strategic growth areas, which include Midtown, Uptown, and a few others throughout the community. And it is all about looking at higher density scenarios and how do you get either land or the cash in lieu of land or some combination of both of those things.
You have done a fantastic job if anybody takes the time to read the report and realize the different buzzwords about parks, which aren't the parks that we know about today. There are areas you can walk down the street and see maybe a bit of grass, but as you pointed out, you'll see a lot of concrete. So I just hope all councillors take the time to read this, and the residents do. But it is that report, we've got to summarize it in a more succinct way, Mayor Burton, I believe. But we also should be encouraging every resident in Oakville to write to their MPPs, because a lot of this has been taken out of our control, and we're going to be blamed for it in 20 and 30 years' time for doing a terrible job of planning the future of our growth areas in Oakville. And that's all I've got to say about that, and thank you.
Thank you,
Councillor Elgar. Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I'd like to thank Councillor Elgar for his thoughts. I think this is one of the more important items that we're going to deal with this term of council, because it has long-lasting effects into the future. The mention was made of Midtown. At this point, we have a river valley and a pioneer cemetery, and obviously very concerned about the amount of space we're going to have there. In terms of the timing and implementation of the public consultation, there was a mention of a session this Thursday, I believe.
That's correct.
And what about future sessions? I haven't seen the Thursday one promoted anywhere yet, but what about future public meetings or residents association meetings in each of the wards I realize that time is extremely tight, but I think it's imperative that we make our residents aware of this.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think I need to rely on your staff for the consultation program if there's further than this Thursday.
Mr. Palmer, you may not be aware, but one of the things, well, three of the ways that we can help alert the public to this, and the two phases that are ahead of us, this one and then the returning modifications or final proposed draft, are the individual newsletters of the ward councilors, the Office of Mayor and Council weekly Wednesday e-newsletter, and the media and the town's website as well. It's important to remember what the planning director pointed out. The context here is that there's another event coming down the road, which is after this round of consultation, we'll have a final proposed bylaw, which of course in our method of approaching bylaws will have public consultation. So Councillor Giddings, I hope that's helpful to you to answer that question.
I appreciate your comments, Mr. Mayor. This council has prided itself on public consultation and feedback from residents and listening to them and telling them what we heard and then going a step further than that. So other than Residents Associate, your community leaders roundtable and individual newsletters, that will be it for public consultation at this point, this Thursday?
No, I listed more than that. Would you like me? Let's not go back and rehash that, but the media, the town's website, the town has a newsletter, you have a newsletter, all of these things are what I mentioned.
All right, I appreciate the time sensitivity. How does this play into the OPA for Midtown, for example? I believe, as you mentioned, there are a lot of moving pieces and conflicting and tight timelines on them. Do we have any indication of how this will all mesh together, I guess you could say?
Based on what we heard tonight, and I'll turn to our town solicitor to amplify this, we can't use the new alternative calculation for Midtown until we have a bylaw. And until we have a bylaw, we won't get as much. So there's your time frame. Mr. Solicitor, is there anything that you would add or correct? Please unmute your mic so we can hear your addition and correction.
My apologies. No, I think that's a very good answer, Mayor Burton. Obviously, we cannot collect pursuant to any bylaw until it's been passed by council, but then of course there is an appeal opportunity, so that whatever new bylaw comes forward that council considers and may wish to pass, there's an opportunity for it to be subject to appeal.
Hey, Kathy.
Sorry, and that will run its course.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I don't know where the interjection came from. I'm sure wherever it came from, they're regretful. Councillor O'Meara, it's your turn.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just curious about the stakeholder outreach to the school boards. What is it we're hoping to get out of the school boards on this? I mean, what role do they have in parkland dedication with the town or in our bylaw?
I'll try that through you, Mr. Mayor. It's actually a requirement of the legislation that we reach out to school boards. They can have some impact because they're typically built in conjunction with a piece of open space, but it is a requirement of the legislation to meet specifically with school boards.
Okay, so we're ticking some boxes here, which is obviously important. I guess my question, I brought this up before. Do we count parkland on schools right now currently as a part of our parkland infrastructure in the town, or is that owned by the school boards and we have multiple? Is that counted as our inventory of parkland?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's, every municipality does that differently, and we may do it on a site-specific basis, so I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, well, barring staff jumping in and telling me what that is for Oakville, I guess I'll ask on if we're trying to get creative here, we're trying to look for ways to increase our parkland. Have we thought about trying to work with the province to coincide with the construction of a school and parkland and marry those two things together so that there's sort of a trifecta of benefit, the school, the parkland, and the municipality, or the developer has some sort of a more incentive to build the parkland and the school? I mean, it seems like those three things need to sort of work a little closer together. I'm just wondering whether that's been a consideration from the province or whether that's something we already do.
The short answer is yes, we already do that.
Okay, perfect. So tick that box with the school boards. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Hazlet-Thiel. When you get where you're going, you just need to unmute. There you go.
I am. It's just phones are not as working tonight. Okay. So no surprise to many of you, I voiced my deep concern about the parks plan in August and September of 2022, at which time the words then were the same as now. We are under the gun. We have tight deadlines. We need to make a decision. And you may recall that I asked for, and it was agreed that you would come back and talk about public consultation on the parkland procedures, how and when the public is informed about parkland locations and types. I won't read out the entire list, but it is in the outstanding items, and it was dated that it would return to us Q4 of 2024. So my first point tonight is agreeing to this without having clarity on what is council's role in determining what is park versus cash in lieu on some of these properties where it is incredibly important that we have thought through all the elements. I'm fully open to, of course, staff make a recommendation, but the way this report is written, it's once again, we are just stamping what, we're not even stamping it, it is decided by town staff. So I have a fundamental issue with that, given how important parks, trails are to the very essence and character of Oakville. And we all talked about this at the strategic planning sessions, that it was one of the fundamentally important pieces we had to protect as we go forward. So I'm appreciative that the alternative method will get us more. And I am appreciative of lots of content in the report. I am concerned, though, that there are some elements in the report that are not helpful to helping us maximize green space for the very areas that need more. Because let's not lose sight of that. The intensified areas are the areas that need it the most. You can't open a document in the last 6 to 10 months where people are not referencing mistakes that have been made about not providing enough green space, not hardscape. But I won't take up all my time tonight to go on, because I know deep in your hearts, you all agree with this. You agree that green and parks and public space in intensified areas should be significant. It gives people a chance to come down the elevator with their children to play. It creates healthy lifestyle. And the opening of the Parks Plan report makes that message loud and clear. It then goes on to make the economic argument, and I'm appreciative of it, because it is important that we recognize and developers recognize the economic value of land that has green space. So those elements are all in this report, but then there is a big but. And the but is you are going to, if you approve this and it goes through as written, A, have no control over what's parks or cash in lieu. B, you're not going to have public input the way you should have on lands, and you will jeopardize the future of those spaces. So a few of my core questions are, will we have a document that shows us what percentage of the 12% target for Midtown is going to be sidewalk, which is promenades and sliver parks? Will that be provided to us? And if it won't be provided to us, will it be provided to us with applications?
Councillor, I'm not sure you appreciate the nature of what's before us. This is a consultation to prepare a draft bylaw and manual. The decisions you're saying are being made by this are not being made by this. The decisions are later. The questions you're asking about Midtown are really outside this lane. The Midtown Committee might be the first place you might want to pursue this there. I'll turn to the planning director to see if he wants to add anything to that answer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. This document is really setting the trajectory of where we want to go as a municipality, and to that, you will see that there's recommendations, for example, that suggest the parkland should be at least 12% within our strategic growth areas. Those are directions should council choose to take those recommendations for staff to take back and embed into future planning policy. As it relates to detailed work within our growth areas, whether it's Midtown, whether it's Uptown, there's further work that we need to do, and we'll be able to have those discussions, whether it's through the Committee of the Whole or through subsequent processes, such as doing the public realm master plan that we need to do for Midtown. All of these elements really will illustrate how to implement the policies that the council would be faced with.
Okay. I am not reading that in this report, nor am I satisfied with those answers. I am deeply concerned that there is clarity to the public on what is our proposed parks plan and how it affects the SGAs in plain language, and that there be greater public consultation for them on understanding how this document ties directly to each of the SGAs and ties directly to where they have input and where council has a decision that can be made around the amount of parks and how we spend cash in lieu. And I appreciate that there's a level of detail here that we should spend a significant amount of time on. I'm not satisfied that we have clarity on what we're going to approve or where or when we're going to get a chance to say it. It always seems the ball's moving down the road, and we'll have that discussion. And maybe in Q4 2024, which is what the outstanding issues report says, we'll get a chance to get answers on some of this. But if we're going to make a decision on a bylaw, and that bylaw is binding on an OPA, because I'm not sure it's clear which has the authority, the OPA or the parkland dedication bylaw, I'd like an answer to that. This is unsettling. It is the fact that that councilors were not notified that there is a parks consultation on Thursday night is a bit shocking, to say the least. I shouldn't have to find out about it from Twitter, from somebody who happened to catch it, when it is a fundamentally important, process. We just went and spent time between 4 and 5 and 5 and 6, some of us, talking about how can we do an effective transportation master plan consultation. And we haven't even had the courtesy of knowing what's the consultation going to look like on Thursday, let alone that we were told there was one on Thursday. So while I have now erred on the side of ranting, I've made clear I disagree with the lack of, as one delegate said tonight, the lack of precision, the lack of clarity and transparency. This is fundamental to how we grow out Oakville.
Councillor, I don't know if you noticed, but we are not passing a bylaw tonight. We're not.
I know you're not, Burton, but we are. This is the first time we are seeing it again, and we are going out to public consultation on Thursday night with no notification to certain councillors at least. And it is not clear when and how the public will have a greater say in a sliver park, a promenade, what percentage of that'll be, in the SGAs. I just like that clarity for the public. It's the least we can do for them.
All in due time, Councillor, all in due time. Councillor Ilger?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Burton. I just want to headline in this report, like at least in page 40 of the report, they actually refer to I believe, probably our eco park that we have quite a few kilometers away, that the land cost and population growth estimate within the strategic growth plan area will require the town to acquire parkland outside of the strategic growth areas. But I guess I'm thinking of little kids in their tricycles heading up, 10 kilometers to get to that park. I think this is where we're missing it. That's the problem. And if you look at you go to page 43, within the downtown Oakville, Kerr Village, Brawny specific growth areas, provision of smaller scale urban park elements on individual development sites is encouraged, but not necessarily required. Like, I think the writer of this report did a very accurate job, but I just feel it's the wrong way. And it's because we're limited by the province. I realize that. But we, as a council, have to get the people to go to the province, to start telling the province, this isn't working for us here or anywhere in Ontario if people knew. The trouble is they don't know. And it'll be 20 years. Some of us will probably be in our graves, but I don't think we can be happy with where we're going with this. So I just wish that we could get a real report highlighting, if you're moving into those areas, just think about it in 20 or 30 years time when you try to let your kids go out to a park anywhere to do anything on their tricycle. And I don't know, I could go on and on. I got dog ears all, you know me. Stickies everywhere. So that's it for tonight. But every councillor should take the time to sit down and read this report, and all the public should too. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. On behalf of council, I'm not aware of any councillors who don't read their reports. I wonder if I could get the indicated motion to authorize staff to engage in consultation. Don't be shy now, I need a volunteer. Councillor Adams, thank you. Any objection to the motion? Thank you, Councillor. Council, the motion carries. Councillor Hazatiel, it's close. All right, we have to move on now to the recommendation report on the official plan amendment for Brawny River LP at 1300, 1316, 1326, 1342, and 1350 Brawny Road. We have a presentation, we have registered delegations, as I understand it, from one person, is that right, Madam Clerk?
Yes.
Oh, no, we've
Yes,
got two.
Jessica Byers is here
Okay,
as
so,
an agent for questions.
all right. Jessica Byers and Liz Housen are available in person for questions. And we have a volunteer in the chamber who is interested in delegating in person, and that's Jeffrey Belcher. And I think that means that you're up, Mr. Belcher, and we look forward to your information.
Thank you very much for your time. I understand everyone's probably at their bandwidth by now, so I'll keep this brief. So, okay, as many of you know, I'm a young guy interested in housing in Oakville, and I come across this development here off of Bronte, I believe. And it seems like a great idea. I mean, this area is kind of not really being used, but and housing is important, so I'm here to advocate for that. But I do have some concerns, and I think there's a bit more direction that could be put towards this. I understand. I think that the staff have recommended it for approval, but I'm going to say it anyways. So there's a couple things. The first thing is actually just a question for staff, and it's how much percentage-wise of our residential areas are designated low residential in some variety. I think there's about 11 different designations that we use, but I'm just trying to wonder, because I see here a lot about, I think about half of it, or over half, is low residential. And part of the reason why we're in a housing crisis in the first place is because we are building so much of the lowest density housing. And if we're going to be spending resources, I think as a town and bandwidth of our city councilors and staff to get this done, I think we should be getting a bit more bang for our buck. As I understand it, the original proposal was, I think it was 39 semi-detached units and 96 townhouses. And so just for context, I think the townhouses fall under the medium residential zoning area of this development, and then the 39 we're going to fall under the low residential zoning of this development. But now it's been brought up to about 82 semi-detached, so from 39 to 82, and then the townhouses have been brought down 10, from 96 to 86, and now it's about half and half. And I'm just a bit curious as to why that was. I'm hoping to get maybe an answer about it tonight, because I mean, townhouses are not the most dense form of housing, but they're certainly more dense than semi-detached dwellings. They're much more climate friendly, they're more cost effective, they do better at addressing the issue that we're trying to address today. And I think it's a better use of the area in Bronte as well. So the other thing is, I don't actually see much in this plan for future transit nodes that could probably be integrated into the neighborhood. It looks like a very car-centric suburban dwelling, which is pretty normal in this area, but it's something that I think we want to move away from. And I know that's supported in the Livable Oakville plan for this area, so I think I would like to see a bit more of that. And I think it's probably good just for our transportation master plan as well. I mean, we're looking at this area as being more of a growth area. I mean, not necessarily this specific area, but it's going to be next to one, and people are going to want to commute in to Bronte or to Midtown or to the rest of Oakville, and we should give them an opportunity to. I don't think they would only want just car ways to get around, and even just like a roundabout for the buses would probably be a lot better. But as I understand it, I don't think this is actually going to happen within the year, because I think this has been appealed to the OLT. And if I told you that 4 people with $400 could get together and derail a development for 2 years, you'd probably call that arson. But we call that appealing to the Ontario Land Tribunal in this province. And it's definitely going to be a problem going forward. So I feel like we run into this every time. I think a lot of the Midtown developments are also appealed. And it's a total nightmare for everybody involved. And so I wanted to put this just on the radar. I know there's a bit of attention on it already, but I want to express explicit support for this. The community planning permit system is a totally different way to reorganize the way that we zone the city. And basically all it says is we basically take an area, we designate it how we want. All the consultation happens up front. And then once it's set. And developers can't come in, they can't amend it in the same way that they do now, where we say, 5 stories on Lakeshore, and now they want 10, and it's a whole nightmare for everybody and gets everybody riled up, and it just creates a toxic environment for creating new housing. But with this, it's like, here's what we're building. If you don't want to build it, don't come to us. And if you want to build it, we can just approve it and get shovels in the ground within 45 days, I think is the target. And the only people that can appeal it are the developers themselves. And I mean, obviously, a developer probably won't appeal their own development, but it keeps it nice and brief. And I just want to express support for that, because I know there's some interest. And I think it'd be a great use for this area specifically, as well as Midtown and for the rest of Oakville. And so, yeah, just to recap, community planning permit system, keep that in mind, and the percentage of low residential zoning in Oakville versus all residential zoning, because I think we're going to see quite an increase. And I wouldn't even be surprised if that's over 50 to 75% of our zoning. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for the time you took to prepare this. And I will get back to you with those percentage figures, and I look forward to a conversation with you about your interests.
Thank you.
Councilor O'Meara may have a question for you before you.
Well, yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And maybe I was kind of hoping staff might have had a little preempt to this to maybe address some of the issues that the delegate brought up. For instance, how this came about, where this is with regards to the tribunal and settlement discussions, because I think he did raise that question. So I'm wondering maybe if staff could just speak briefly to why this is coming where it is and what the genesis is of that, and how that is, because I know we talk about OLT and that sort of thing. So perhaps we can just get in front for this delegate and perhaps the next delegate, if they can maybe just put a little bit of background onto this planning application here for us.
Thank you, Councillor, for anticipating what I was about to do. I appreciate it. Mr. Westerhoff, and you.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Through you, Mayor, so just some background on where we are. So this OPA is essentially an implementing OPA to adjust and modify some of the policies that need to be revised or amended to implement the development concept that's been modified through the OLT process. So we have a zoning bylaw and a draft plan of subdivision. Those are appealed to the OLT. This OPA is within the 90-day time frame. So this one is not appealed, and what this OPA does is provide exceptions and modifies policy and the mapping to implement, the development concept that's sort of been collaborated on and established through those appealed files.
Right, thank you. I think that's very helpful. There are no further delegations that I know of, Council, and I'll just read the indicated motion. And there's a technical correction in here for the record. That the application for an official plan amendment submitted by Brawny River LP be approved on the basis that the application is consistent. Councillor Elgar, did you want to do anything before I read it, or are you moving it?
Mayor Burton, I wanted to thank staff for at least highlighting to potential purchasers that in fact there may never be a school in that area, so they'll always be bused. And I realize that's written in there now, and that's what was missing from Saw-Wet, where everybody thought there was going to be a school, unless there's some magic happens in the next few years. Everybody will be bused, whether it be Catholic or the Protestant school board. It's the public school board, and I'd just like to comment. It's amazing what a fundraising at that location will do for some politicians, and I'd be pleased to move it. I had it for 18 years, so I've seen this since the beginning. I've got files on this going back, and a lot of land got switched from what it was as protection to non-protection, and that's all I'm going to say about that. So I'd be happy to move it.
Thank you very much. So this is the application for the official plan amendment submitted by Brawny River on the basis that the application is consistent with the provincial policy statement, conforms with all applicable provincial plans, the Region of Halton official plan, has regard for matters of provincial interest, and represents good planning for the reasons outlined in the report from the Planning Services Department, which is dated October 31st, but should read November 7th. And number 2, that bylaw 2023-145, an amendment to the Livable Oakville official plan, be passed. And 3, that notice of council's decision reflect that council has fully considered all the written and oral submissions relating to these matters, and that those comments have been appropriately addressed. Council, is there any objection to Councillor Elgar's motion? Madam Clerk, no objection is seen. The motion is carried. Now, Council, I would like to walk on an urgent item. I think you have notice of it, but there's some technicalities we have to go through in order to make this happen. And I'll give a headline. we have an opportunity to get simultaneous dispatch as a pilot in Halton, which is something we have long wanted to increase the service to our residents, because it often happens, unfortunately, that our fire units, almost all of whom are trained to respond, don't get dispatched. And so this would be something we've long agitated for. So and it's still not guaranteed, but here are the steps. We need a motion to waive the notice provision in the procedural bylaw, which requires 48 hours public notice to consider this item. And we need a 2/3 vote for that. And I need a motion for that. Councillor Duddick, is this you? Thank you. Is there any objection to this waiving of the notice provisions? Madam Clerk, there's no objection, so that step carries. The next is that council endorse and provide written support of the fire chief's submission to the Solicitor General to expedite the simultaneous notification initiative for the fire department in the town of Oakville and Halton Region Fire Departments. Who would like to move that? Is that you, Councillor Elgar? I'm sorry, Councillor Haslett-Thiel? Very well. Councillor Haslett-Thiel has moved it. Councillor O'Meara, were you competing or did you want to speak or?
I have a question actually for the fire chief, if that's the right time.
Now's the time, and the fire chief is ready.
Thank you so much. Chief, thanks for doing this. I know a number of us have been working over a number of months through the region to try and get an agreement done with the EMS and with the fire stations, not just the fire services, not just in Oakville here. And I was under the impression that was moving ahead forward. This seems like a different step entirely. Can you maybe just update us on why we're going this route and what maybe happened at the region to sort of reach this amicably?
Yes, hoping you can hear me okay through you, Mayor Burton.
We hear you perfectly.
Perfect. So, Councillor, I just wanted to be very clear. The tiered response agreement and what we are doing as a working group through the MPDS triage tool is a completely separate issue than simultaneous notification. So when someone phones 911 and the call is taken at the Mississauga CAC Center for the provincial location, from there, the call is then sent to our fire dispatch by way of a manual transmission. That's currently what's taking place. The uniqueness is that currently Mississauga CAC for Mississauga, Caledon, and Brampton has an interface that automatically tiers fire at the exact same time when they get the 911 call for their paramedics to go. Their fire departments are sent at the exact same time, indicating simultaneous notification. They were an early adopter approximately 10 years ago, and Halton Region has the exact same capabilities available. We have the currently the exact same CAD system that is being utilized in Burlington, that is utilized in Barrie Fire and Emergency Services, where they have simultaneous notification in Simcoe County. And therefore, the infrastructure already exists for us to be a quick mover into this simultaneous notification realm that the Solicitor General's office, as instructed through the Premier's office, to try and make this a reality throughout Ontario. What we're suggesting from Halton Region, and I act as the fire coordinator for the Halton Region fire departments, is that we're saying we don't have to wait 18 or 24 months through a consultant report to be able to flip the switch, to be able to do this. We have the infrastructure in place. It is not a cost adventure for us. This is an IT solution programming from a provincial standpoint for the interface at the Mississauga CAC Center to allow us at the Burlington Dispatch to be able to receive our calls in a timely manner. It allows for a greater arrival times, sharing of information, And this enhances the fact that the tiered response agreement that we are finalizing, it simply means we're going to get to the calls that we are agreeing to go to the calls at a greater timeliness. And that is a better service to all of our residents and allows us to do what we're trained to do.
Thank you, Chief. As I understand you, this is not instead of, this is an enhancement to. Councillor
That is
Mera,
correct.
are you good? Thank you. Councillor Elgar.
Mayor Burton, I thank you for bringing this forward tonight. This has been a long time in the making. Paul, so happy we're at this point. And also, I think hats off to Phil Cartwright for educating us councillors on a lot of things that have been going on behind the scenes that we knew nothing about. And I would ask for a recorded vote on this, Mayor Burton.
Thank you, Councillor Elgar. I will call the vote. Is there any objection to Councillor Haslett-Thiel's motion? Madam Clerk, there being no objection, this carries unanimously, and please record the names of all councillors present and voting. All right. Council, I now invite you to turn to the Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee minutes of October 24th. Carolyn is still here. I believe she's still available for questions. I may be misspeaking as I look in the room. I don't see her. We need a mover for that the following recommendation pertaining to item 4.2 of the Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee minutes from its meeting on October 24th be approved and the remainder of the minutes received. 4.2, the notice of intention to designate 3175 Lakeshore Road West, that this item be deferred to the November 28th, 2023 Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee meeting at the request of the property owner. Do I have a mover for this? Councillor Giddings, thank you. Do I have an objector to this? Madam Clerk, there being no objection, Councillor Giddings, your motion carries. Would one of you provide a motion to rise and report? Councillor Longo, thank you. Does anyone object? That carries. I rise and report the Committee of the Whole has met and has made recommendations on the consent items, the public hearing items, the discussion items, and the advisory committee minutes as listed in the agenda and noted by the clerk. A mover and seconder for this report would be in order. Councillor Chisholm and Councillor Natalia Lischina, thank you very much. Any objection? There is no objection, and so the report is adopted. Council, new business of an emergency congratulatory or condolence nature is in order now. Councillor Dudek.
Thank you, Your Worship. Actually, it's not under that item. Just wanted to clarify that the gentleman who was to delegate this evening, the item number was correct, the address was incorrect, and that was why there was some confusion. He has since touched base with Councillor Chisholm and myself, and we've assured him his comments will be passed along to the planning director to be captured.
Thank you very much for that. All right. Councillor Lischina.
I just want to let everybody know 5 more sleeps till Santa Claus visits us, and we're looking forward to the big event with our main elf, Councillor Dudek, at the helm.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it like a little kid. All right, thank you, everybody. It would now be good to have a mover and seconder for consideration and reading of the bylaws. Councillor Elgar and Councillor McNeice, thank you. Any objection? There being none, the bylaws are considered read and passed. And I thank you for the time you gave tonight and your many fine questions and contributions. It's been terrific working with you, and the meeting is ended.